Okay, good morning, good morning members and staff to this meeting this morning. I have some housekeeping to read out to you. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble in the Queen Victoria statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust fire marshal regulations, if you signed into the Guildhall, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. Live web streaming. May I draw everyone's attention to the fact that the meeting will be live streamed and that the camera zooms in to show the speaker. This is linked to the microphones, therefore can I please remind all attendees to turn the microphones on to speak and then off again once you have finished speaking. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. Please be advised that the public seating area is not in view of the camera used to website this meeting. Can we then we'll go around and do some introductions. If I haven't said before, I'm Leo Madden and chair of the meeting. I'll call members in first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Councillor George Madgwick of the Paulsgrove Ward.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Stuart Brown from Fratton.
Good morning, thank you, Chair. Councillor Hannah Brent, for Drayton and Farnington.
Councillor Graham Heaney, St Jude Ward.
Thank you all.
Peterborough City Solicitor.
Thank you. I'm James Harris. I'm the Senior Local Democracy Officer.
I'm Kelly Nash from the Strategy Unit.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor.
Elizabeth Goodman, Chief Internal Auditor.
Richard Webb, Deputy Director of Finance.
Liam Preston, Trainee Accountant.
Okay, thank you all very much for that. We have apologies today from Councillor Benedict Swan and Councillor Daniel Weems. And Hannah, I have to think of Brent, I have to say, all right? Hockaday. Hannah Brent is in attendance standing in for Councillor Swan and has indicated she has to leave in about an hour's time. Declarations of interest, members, any? No, okay. Can we start with the minutes of the meeting of the 8th of March then, for accuracy of matters arising for those who were there, okay? And I'll do them I'll do them page by page, and I'll use the big numbers. So the first page would be page 5, page 6, page 7. Just at the very bottom, I know Ernst & Young, the external auditor is not here today, but just I hope we'll get to find out what the situation is in relation to their attempts to recruit and to make sure that everything they do here is timeless. Page 8. Just at the bottom of 14, there was concern about when the audit came in, and it's been requested that September or November be in for in future. So again, we get an update on that. Page 9. Oh. Page 10. Peter, 18, the appointment of an independent person. All we got at recommendation 3 is a new independent person is sought to fill the current vacancy. Have we thought about that and when we would do it?
I think we're up to speed on that.
Yep.
I think we've done that.
You've done it?
I think we've got 4.
Oh, I mean, we normally involve the committee.
Yeah. I don't think we're short on those at all. Which page is that, Leah?
I don't know, I'm just thinking about the last time. Do you think there was one in reserves then, and we just put down... I haven't been asked to do anything. To interview any independent persons.
No, I was going to say, Chair, our current cohort of independent persons is up to speed.
Oh.
Yeah. I said that during the training just now. We got 4 and we still got 4. And which page is that, Leah? That might be...
Page 10.
That might be a mistake.
See, that's redundant, do you think?
Yeah, I think the truth of it is I think we've done it. I just didn't remember doing it. Or my colleague did it, but dealt with it, you know.
It was in your report.
It's in my report, but we have 4.
So apologies. As long as we've got 4. As long as we've got 4, okay. Page 11 and page 12. Are members happy with that? Could I sign those off as a true record? Thank you very much. Thank you. Can we move on to item 4, which is the Internal Audit Performance Status Report to the 6th of July 23 and Annual Audit Opinion 22-23. And I'll pass over to Lizzie. Thank you, Lizzie.
Thank you, Chair. So, councillors, in front of you is the annual report, but obviously the progress report from the last reporting period. If I can just take you through a couple of salient points. In relation to items that we have completed since the last reporting time, I will come on to. But across the year, all of the audits that are performed, along with intelligence and investigations and any other items of work that we've performed, will enable an assessment to be carried out on the effectiveness of the internal control framework. We have performed that based basically on the work that we have carried out and on the level of assurances that have been attributed to items of work across the year. There is a couple of areas to note as concern, which are on page 22, and that is in relation to an item of work for direct payments on the children's side where we're giving no assurance. That is a bespoke area, so there aren't systemic failings within the organisation. There is, however, perhaps a pattern that is emerging in relation to key controls, and that's because some of the investigation work that we've carried out across the year has actually highlighted that we have some gaps in the framework. So we need to take a step back, identify some of those growing concern areas, and actually undertake further work. There are 4 levels that can be attributed in relation to the effectiveness of the control framework. Last year, reasonable assurance was given. I feel comfortable that we can give reasonable assurance this time round. However, I would like to flag that that pattern that is emerging in relation specifically to key controls may well deteriorate over time. And it is for the committee to keep a watching brief regarding our work that we carry out for 23-24. When we move to section 8 of the report, that is the detail around the additional items of work that we have taken out since the last reporting period. I wasn't going to go through them in any great detail, but happy to answer any particular questions that you may have for any of the areas. The last committee that we had promised that we would give you an update, and it'll be a verbal update in relation to home to school. And this is where there have been historic problems and issues where, when we've audited, there have been gaps in the control arrangements. And the last time we performed a first follow-up review, which was earlier on in the year, those gaps were still evident. So we've carried out a subsequent review. And just to remind committee members, this was in relation to whether we were undertaking the correct checks and balances for those that were transporting children on home to school. I can report that the follow-up has moved the position, and we will finalise the report and bring it back to the following committee, but it's moved from limited assurance to reasonable assurance. I have noted that we will do regular reviews because of the history behind sometimes controls being in place, but then them sliding or deteriorating. So the report back to the committee is the overall position has definitely improved, but we will keep a watching brief. And whilst there were a couple of examples in our testing of where we didn't have the evidence, that's actually because they had recently expired. So where you have to obtain evidence of insurance or where you have to obtain evidence of DBS checks, there are always, it's like painting the fourth bridge, there will always be a number that drop off and need to be refreshed. So moving on throughout the report, As I said, the overall opinion is reasonable assurance. We have to also communicate to you the quality assessment in relation to us as an internal audit team. This year we were actually inspected externally, and that is at the back of the report. You will see that we comply with the public sector internal audit standards, but that is something that I have to bring to your attention along with any perceived gaps. There are some recommendations that were made by the external assessor, and they are contained at the back of this particular report. Throughout the report, there is also on pages 44 onwards some comparison information regarding the level of audits that have been performed and their assurance ratings. So you can see between the last 2 years the direction of travel. Saying that, we audit different activities, and those activities may not have had a review for a period of time, and in which case the controller framework may have deteriorated, which may influence the end result. So, Chair, beyond that at present, and I think I've picked out most of the salient points, it is whether there are any particular questions you would like me to respond to.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, it was a bit of a miss me when we started. I'd like to welcome Councillor Heaney to... Councillor Heaney's been here before in other capacities, but as a full member now of this panel, and Councillor George Matchwick. Sorry, I missed that out. The home to school transport. And some members will know that, you know, we picked this up in a different phase several years back. And it's heading towards things happening, but will the system ever be perfect? I mean, our concern was kids travelling, you know, in taxis or whatever, without the driver having the proper insurance or the DBS. Is this, or whatever it's called, what's it, anyway, the police check. Are we going to have this, will this be a regular thing coming up because of the, I mean, I don't know. I mean, why are there some gaps in filling? I can see people moving and whatever, but that happens in all organisations, Lizzie. I just wonder if there's a light at the end of the tunnel and we'll never see this issue again.
I think in relation to any system, and any significant changes in its resource that is deployed to actually oversee and undertake the checks and balances, there can always be problems and issues. I can't give you that assurance on any activity. Saying that, the control framework that is in place, if it is regularly followed, and I think that's the underlying concern that has been discussed with the senior officers within that service, that they need to follow those control arrangements consistently and regularly. And it's only then, and perhaps over a sustained period of time, that we can see that those controls have been enacted, will we be able to provide you with good assurance. It is an activity where it is like the Forth Bridge. The minute you have done all of your checks and balances, there is inevitably a number of drivers whose checks need to be reperformed. And there have been changes behind the scenes as well. For example, who the taxi licence is actually provided by. And that had quite a big impact. Councillor Madden, I'd like to be positive and say yes, there are certain things that are outside of the service's control. It's about keeping to those controls.
But we're heading in the right direction now. Okay. Could I just pick out some things in the report itself, just to confirm things going to happen. So on page 19, you did 4 consultant reviews and 16 grants. These presumably are grants from government, are they? Yeah, and the consultancies would be, I think we have a lot more consultancies happening in the organisation, but what would those 4 be?
The consultative items of work are in relation to what our internal audit would have carried out. So as an audit function, we have to undertake work that inspects the control environment, but we also are called upon to do consultative activities. Consultative activities are generally where we have been flagged or it's been indicated that there is a problem within a particular area, and instead of doing an audit or an investigation, we work with the service. The consultative items of work that we have undertaken in the last year would have covered, and I'll get Paul, because I'm getting a bit too old and I can't see some of the items on his screen and it's way too small. So if I pick up on a couple and then Paul fills in with the areas that we haven't covered. So there was an issue in relation to children's services where we undertook substantive item of work around their control framework. There was also the attendance on the shareholders board. And now I'm going to hand you over to Paul because I can't remember the other two.
The other two were we looked at the partnership governance, so governance around our partnerships within a council, and the control of agency staff at Shearwater Care Home.
So they're internal consultancies there. Right, sorry, I was thinking of these people coming in making millions of pounds. Okay, thanks. Just a few little things. I mean, just to confirm, as I always do, some three projects have been removed from the audit plan. And just, I say this every time, don't I? But just your assurance that they will come back again.
We have a finite amount of resource, and when we have issues that are raised, obviously we need to prioritise. And so the only way that they really come off the table is if we have a higher priority item that we need to cover. I review the plan on a quarterly basis, so as things flex, they get reconsidered for coming in or out of the plan. Equally, when I do the planning for the next year, I consult with all relevant parties, including yourself, Chair, regarding what the risk exposure is and where we need to deploy our resource. So they most definitely are considered, and if they ever escalate in risk, then they come back in onto the table and something else gets moved.
Okay, thank you. Lizzie, just two more things from me. There's a pattern emerging of potential and actual losses stroke thefts. You know, we've experienced these things in the past, but is this getting worse over the years, and the theft, fraud?
You know, Chair, that we actually cover Isle of Wight and we cover Southampton, when we cover a number of the small authorities as well. There is most definitely a pattern of small bespoke thefts and frauds at a local level, but actually also at a national level. I know that off the back of the pandemic with the grants, there was a spike in relation to, and this is nationally, in relation to criminals overseas that were attempting to do fraud, and there has been a significant amount. So at both levels, yes. That is generally influenced by a number of things. If any organisation has significant changes in its staffing, if it hemorrhages experience, if it restructures, if it changes its priorities, that can all influence. So I think it is something that we have to be very cognizant of and direct where we need to do any work. If you would like to have any further information in relation to the investigations that we've carried out, we could do that in closed session later on.
Just my final point, you know, there are lots of high risks shown this time. Now, I couldn't find my previous papers, but is this going up again, Lizzie, or is it just my imagination? And if so, why?
I think, going back to what Lizzie said in the opening thing, it's very hard to sometimes say whether it's going up because we're all just in different areas. So it's very hard. When we do the comparisons year on year, we do that to give some context, but we are very aware that one or two audits that we haven't looked at potentially for 5 years could really spike those numbers. So I don't think that there is a massive increase. I think it might just be the audits that we've done that haven't been done in a while, which is showing why there's so many high risks in there. So at the moment, I don't think we have an overall concern that there's been a significant increase, but it is something that we regularly keep our eye on.
Okay, thank you. And your conclusion is reasonable?
Reasonable, but with the caveat that there's a lot going on and that could deteriorate, particularly in relation to the key controls and the vulnerability of the internal control framework.
Okay, thank you, Lizzie. Members? Councillor Heaney-Graham.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I had a couple of supplementary questions based on points that Councillor Madden had raised and one other question. So on the supplementary question, we talked about the homeschool transport and the fact that we use taxis for that. There is a bit of an issue, as you probably are aware, that taxi licensing isn't primarily Portsmouth-based. A taxi can operate in Portsmouth, they're registered somewhere else. And we have different standards by which we license taxis in terms of the quality of the vehicle and other things like CCT and so on. So my question is sort of twofold. One is a driver will need a DBS check to make sure they can actually take vulnerable people. So is the DBS check accepted from any other authority, or do we require a specific one, Portsmouth-based, i.e. when they do that? I'm assuming that may well be the case. And secondly, do we have to employ taxi drivers whose vehicles may not be registered in Portsmouth, may not meet the same standards, because there seems to be an issue there as well, potentially?
So in relation to the DBS check, we have arrangements with other local authorities, and in actual fact, we wouldn't ask any driver that we are contracting with to have a separate DBS check. We would look to obtain that. The difficulty is, though, that because they are now licensed elsewhere, whereas we could pull upon the information that we had within our own licensing department, that's what feeds into the fact that the home to school transport team have had difficulties trying to get the information because it's no longer in-sourced. In relation to your second point, which can you remind me?
It was about the vehicle, the different standards of the vehicle.
Thank you. Apologies, I've written down one. In relation to the second point, then we can we can contract with anybody. So in effect, if they've licensed it elsewhere, it may not be the standard that we wish. Saying that, there are other checks and balances within how we contract with them and other requirements in relation to kind of quality that we could put within the contract.
That's helpful clarification. We have the choice there. My second supplementary, again, referred to the point that Councillor Madden made about the audits removed from the audit plan. Clearly, they are going to move forward, and I understand the reasons why. My question was, what priority do they get if they've been deferred? Could they be deferred again, or because they've been deferred, do they get more priority for consideration next time?
One of the considerations that we have when we're actually going through what we deem as being the audit universe is the length of time since the previous audit, but it's a number of factors. So it will be influenced most definitely by that, but fundamentally it's where it sits within the risk rating, that particular activity. But it can be escalated, yes.
And my third question, which is the final one, you'll be relieved to know, where you talk about the direct payments. Now I've lost the page. What I want you to be clear is this an issue of individuals making mistakes in what they do, or is it an issue of the system doesn't allow them to do it correctly? Because it seems to be the two potential issues there.
The fundamental issue Audit had with it is that there should be a requirement, because the money is handed over, there is a very clear requirement that we have to give ourselves assurances that the intended use of that money is actually, it's been used for the purpose intended. And on this one, the reason it's got no assurance is we as an organisation have not reviewed with the person receiving the money for a considerable period of time. We've not done those checks and balances, which is part of paying them in the first place. So it's the total absence, really, of, and I hate to use the word audit because it's not this audit team, but there should be an audit on the expenditure, and that audit has not occurred.
So in a sense, what the person giving the payment has to get the person to account for what they've actually done with it. And how they do that obviously has to be a matter for consideration because, you know, provide receipts, whatever. Yeah. Okay.
And we've not asked them, Councillor. That's the problem. We've not said to them, by the way, we've been paying you X, Y, Z over a period of time. As part of the agreement, you need to give us a response.
And is that because the system hasn't had that instruction in it, or is it because people have just not bothered or forgotten to do it or have felt unable to do it?
One of the underlying is that it sat between two services, and there was a little mix within the two services as to who was responsible for performing that.
Okay, continue. Thank you. All right, members? Okay. Councillor Madgwick, George.
Thank you, Chair. You'll have to excuse my naivety as a new member, but just looking through, obviously, the report, and I'm assuming there's a very simple answer for this, but do you have a framework in relation to what you tier as critical, high, medium, low? Because obviously, is it from a financial aspect, or is it from a method of getting the receipts and so on and so forth? I only ask that because obviously once something's high in here and it's £71 and something is medium but a couple of £1,000. So I'm assuming it's not in relation to the financial value, but in the sense of the process that audits that financial value. Is that correct?
Yeah, so if you, on page 24, we give the exception risk rankings and a description as to how we assign them. It is very much the auditor's opinion. We purposely don't prescribe amounts or numbers because we don't want it to be that prescribed. We'd much rather look at, as you say, the bigger picture and say, okay, what is the overall impact of that issue within that service or in that activity? So that's generally how we come up with those risk ratings, and hopefully those descriptions on page 24 of the bigger pack might give a bit more guidance.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I did think that because, as I say, it was just want to clarify it. Just looking through the different ones, as I say, once again, I might sound silly, but you bear with me. On page 26, Tangiers Road, Director of Children's, Families and Education. Obviously, there's 3 high-risk ones there with limited assurance. My question is if there's, say, £3,800 of transactions, 148 transactions that are in relation to takeaway meals, if we don't have the receipts for that, how as an organisation do we submit them via our accounts? You know, if we've got no method of proving that money was spent on takeaways, how do we, validate that or pay it out? How do we?
In actual fact, it wasn't the lack of receipts for that particular area. It's the value of expenditure in that particular pocket that we were raising to say, actually, if it's 23% of your budget for provisions, is that where you should be spending your money? And Councillor, just to pick up again on the point that Paul has made regarding how we assess whether it's high or not. The other thing that will influence that is whether there is a systemic thread that is going through or whether it's an isolated incident, if that makes.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So the problem there is why are you spending a quarter of your entire budget on takeaway meals when that's clearly not a cost-effective method of dealing with your money. Okay, that's interesting. 2 more very, very brief questions. On page 34 in relation to hire cars, Director of Regeneration, if there's an issue there, it says the new implementation date is scheduled to be completed by July 24. Why, if there's something that's got limited assurance with obviously high expectations raised, why do we have to wait a year for that to be changed? Is that not something that can be done swifter? It just seems like a long time to wait for something that could be of risk.
Councillor, can we come back to that question because it would be useful for us to pull up the full report, if that's okay, because I can't recall off the top of my head.
Yeah.
So can we pull that one up?
Yeah, of course. And the very last one I've got, which you might be able to answer, is on page 32, the commercial rent section. I'm glad this one's raised actually, because this is something that I was questioning a couple of weeks ago, without even knowing this was coming up in the report. it says the process is in place to seek assurance on portfolios compliance. It's not been enforced. Do they not have a system where it triggers kind of like an alert every rent review period? Is it not like an automatic process, or is it a manual process there, relying on a human to check on a database and so on and so forth? Like, it just seems strange that there's not a automatic triggering, which would be a really simple fix in my opinion, because if it was an automatic triggering, it would flash up, this needs to be rent reviewed. So would that not be a really easy and simple and quick fix to the problem?
They do have a system actually in place where it captures all information. I don't recall there being an automated process. However, they can extract the data out of that. I will double check the automated, does it send an alert? I don't believe it does, but I'll check for you.
In relation to the hire cars, the reason it's so long is that it's to do with when the contract is then up for tender, and what part of the contract they want to add is they want to include a mobile app within the new contract to allow us to record damage and those sort of things. So that's why it's so long. We always choose the latest date when we're showing you, but yeah, the rest of them were June 23, if that gives you some comfort. For the rest of the exceptions, it's just that long one is to do with when the contract's up.
Perfect. Thank you for answering my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, George. And members? Members, can we then note the recommendations? Recommendation 1, the audit performance and results for 22-23 to the 6th of July 23. 2, any highlighted areas of concern in relation to audits completed from the 22-23 audit plan following follow-up work performed. And 3, the annual audit report and opinion for 22-23. Is that agreed, members? Noted. Thank you very much. Thank you. We're now on to item 5, the draft annual governance statement. Kelly Nash is here. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Just to introduce the report to members, the annual governance statement is something we bring for formal sign-off alongside the final statement of accounts for the authority, but throughout the year we bring a draft version so that members can familiarise themselves with the issues that we're raising. Quite a key document for this particular committee, and it sets out that the systems and processes are in place to ensure the council business is conducted lawfully and in accordance with proper standards. The document that's attached sets out the kind of exposures and risks within the governance framework that have been identified as part of the work and actions to put that right in the coming year, and we generally report on that on an ongoing basis. What you'll see is obviously a link to the report the Chief Internal Auditor presented, because it contains the opinion. What you'll notice, or particularly what Councillor Madden and Councillor Brown will notice having sat on the committee last year, is that the actions identified really aren't massively different this year, and you wouldn't expect them to be, because generally they're an evolution of issues and we're working on them to develop them. But also to note that this year's statement hasn't yet been signed off with the statement of accounts, as members of the committee are aware, and so we've just sort of kept it live to make sure that those are closed down and recognised as well. What we're also bringing to you this round is a refreshed local code of governance, which we do on sort of a 2-yearly basis, again, because not massively huge amounts change on an annual cycle, but again, it just highlights all the different elements of the SIPFA code and what we've got in place in the authority to make sure that those things are upheld, just to give assurance that actually we've got what broad coverage across those standards is required. So happy to take any questions. As I say, this is the draft, and alongside final accounts you will see the final version, which will obviously incorporate any comments that are made in this discussion. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Kelly. And can I say that I had intended to send you some slight typo-type amendments. I will still do that. But as my mother used to say, you know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So, but I'll do that and copy that out to members. There's just a few points on this, Kelly, which I think the problem that we've got in reports is the more we read them, the more we see. And I just some questions, you know, you may not be able to answer them, but some things that have jumped out to me as to why they're there in the first place. If we go to page 74, and again, this is an action from it. So if you page 74, and we're talking about the consultation process, and we talk about neighbourhood forums, to my recollection, last time I asked the question, we have 3 neighbourhood forums. And then we wanted another, the one in Stumpshire resurrected, for instance, but we have heard nothing from it. Is somebody looking to re-establish that mechanism throughout the city? Do you know, Kelly?
I don't, but I'm very happy to take that away and do a written response to the committee on that point.
I mean, of course, it's a fact. There are neighbourhood forums, but there's only 3 of them. There was 24 at one time, Graham, was there, or 24 or something like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's certainly a very different
I know the
architecture
reason
from
for disappeared,
previously.
but I don't know
Yeah,
right.
yeah, I can confirm what the position is.
Kelly, I don't know if you know this one. Page 75, partnership working. Partnerships are about the council coming together with right organisations. They're not organisations of the right, but why have that word in?
I'm very much assuming that's a mistake on my part,
Yeah.
Councillor Madden. I'm very happy to excise that word. I don't know what it's meant to say,
Because
but
it
you're
goes on to
absolutely
say
right. It doesn't read
organisations
correctly.
deliver improved outcomes.
Yeah, I've no idea why
It was
should be
probably
there.
in last year, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, this is terrible reading things. I just, if I can be... Kelly, there was on training, and I've spoken to Peter about this, because an issue's come up about training, particularly in planning. Okay, now, if we go to page 80, where it talks about training and development, compulsory training is provided for members who sit in the following committees: governance and audit, licensing and planning. And then there's mentioned somewhere else in this report about induction training for new members, right? Apparently there is training for these 3 committees is not compulsory. But I don't know when that changed, if it has changed, because I'm querying at the minute. But Peter, I spoke to Peter particularly about the planning one yesterday, because the concern that I've had as chair of this panel, we don't decide on the compulsory training, but we want to know if people then have taken the training. You know, and we ask those. I mean, I've never had a clear answer in my life on this one. So where the policing, particularly in relation to this, and I'm not particularly bothered if there isn't, but I don't know if it's a fact still to go into the 22-23 report. If it was happening then, that's fine. Well, Peter, have you anything on that?
I think that's right, Chair. I think you've got to distinguish between 2 things. First of all, we've got to distinguish between training that's statutorily required, in the sense of licensing, for example, and mandated training that the organisation, i.e. the membership, require other members to attend. So you can essentially dictate to the membership what you would wish them to attend, to do, but that's not the same as a statutory requirement. So you will get a situation whereby you could say, for all good manner of reasons, that people should do training before they sit in the planning committee. The reality is you can rock up to the planning committee and have no training at all. The problem with that is functionally they're wrong, they're going to be dangerous, and they're not going to be accurate. Therefore, your command, in the sense of command and control, would be, it is advisable, and as a committee we would want you to undertake training. That's where you really are with this, Leo. In the sense that it's really for the membership to the police themselves in terms of their own training, set their own training parameters and ensure that that occurs, to avoid failure at delivery when they turn up at a committee. Now, whilst I can give you lots of advice about that's probative, sensible, accurate, risk-averse, unless there is a feeling and a carry from the membership within that space, it's quite difficult to dictate compulsory training. Because if you're elected and you're put on a committee and you're not required to have any training, you can basically go to that committee and vote. Now, I say that's pretty dangerous territory. So my view would be that you need to revisit the idea of how you mandate amongst the 42 of you compulsory training.
Yeah, well, that's fine, but we're looking at 22, 23. In last year, does that stand up? Has there never been statutory you talked about, but is that then incorrect? I'm just trying to correct the statement that compulsory training is provided, or is it just training is provided, or statutory training is provided, Peter? That's really, I'm just trying to
training is provided, Chair, but there's a distinction between training being provided and training being attended and a requirement for you to have a ticket to sit on a committee. So in a very linear sense, training is provided. Answer correct statement. But that's different from the reality of what exists at ground level given the number of complaints I have for various committees relevant to the performance of members who aren't trained. So it's a circular argument. The training's provided, you don't turn up and then you fail to perform. It's that idiom you've got to get out of. Does that make sense?
Well, okay, we'll leave it there. It's just, I have an email now to Natasha Edmonds anyway to find out about that, and also who decides, what committee decides whether training would be statutory or not. It's not us.
I don't think, forgive me, Chair, I think you need to avoid the word statutory. It's either a statutory construct in the sense of licensing, you must, or it's mandated training as if it were an employment requirement in a expectation sense.
Well, how would you describe it here, rather than compulsory training is provided? Just to update or to make sure that the statement is correct, Peter, what would we say then? We would delete compulsory training.
I would say mandated and organised, attended training. I'd say something nebulous like that, to give you the obligation of what it is, how you do it, and how you comply with it.
Does that mean, and I was just taking planning because I've never sat on it, does that mean if you don't do the training, it's mandated that you do it, but if you don't do it, you cannot go to a planning committee as a representative or as a member unless you've done the mandated training?
Provided that the membership set that within the construct of the planning committee, in the sense that they've got a strong chair that insists on that, you can go to the committee, but practically, would I advise you to participate? No, I wouldn't, because you're making a sort of decision based on your experience and training that will be challenged because you haven't done the training. I would say, whilst I cannot enforce it because it's not a statutory requirement in the first place, the sensible, risk-averse thing is to have you watch, observe, be mentored by proper trained members of the planning committee before you're allowed to make decisions that may affect or be challenged.
Okay. It's getting muddier, but however, Councillor Madgwick, George.
Unlike the previous time I spoke, this is actually something I know quite a bit about because I sat on the members' training group for a year with James Harris, and we went through training in significantly great detail, including all the governance and rules around it. So hopefully I can just shed some light for you, Chair, if you don't mind entertaining me for a second. First of all, it's not compulsory. That's the first. I think that's the simple answer you were looking for. It's not compulsory. I think Peter explained it well, that it's recommended or mandatory, but it's not compulsory. So when we were looking at the training regime and going through it, there was a few highlighted problems and a few things that some departments have done to alleviate those problems. So the fact of the matter is, the base answer is it's not compulsory. However, it's recommended. Now, with licensing, and I only know this from obviously being Vice Chair of Licensing last year and obviously shadowing Councillor Peter Harris, or previous Councillor Peter Harris, in licensing, there's a unwritten rule, if you like, that you don't sit on a subcommittee until you've been trained. So you won't be offered a position to sit on a subcommittee until you've been trained, and that's something that the group follow quite strictly. With planning, that is a completely different aspect, and I think that a number of people in here are aware that I was a standing deputy in planning a couple of years ago. ARSA training was never offered training. ARSA training again was never offered training. I ended up going to a planning meeting and informed the chair that I hadn't been trained. The chair still allowed me to sit on it, and I voted on it. And I did highlight this to a number of senior officers, and I was told, well, you don't actually need to be trained. And to me, that made me feel really uncomfortable. Luckily for myself, I know quite a bit about planning, so I felt confident in my capacity to make informed decisions because, as you know, I'm in property and development. I've gone through applications myself, so I felt personally informed. But what about if another member hadn't had the experience I had? So I agree with you, there should be some form of top-down training regiments, but equally with what Peter says in my learning on training when I was on the training working group is that it's got to come from the chair, a strong chair position, like it does in licensing. So maybe we need to reflect that on planning. But equally, and I must say this and I stress this again, there's still members that are on the licensing committee from last year, and I can tell you names in closed sessions, that still haven't had the training for licensing. There's members that have asked for training on licensing since they've joined the licensing committee this year and still not been given training. And there's still members on planning that have not been given training. There is a real flaw in this. Now, how to resolve that, I don't know, Chair. But, you know, to answer your fundamental question, It is not compulsory. So I think compulsory needs to be removed from the word, and I think we need to look at methods of how we make it more, not enforceable, but certainly more encouraged. And just for your information, Chair, as well as a final point, it was brought up in group leaders meeting yesterday with David Williams, and it's something that we're going to be discussing in the group leaders meeting forthcoming when the new chief executive comes in. And the suggestion from our chief executive currently, David Williams, was to make it a group leader mandatory requirement for members when they decide to sit on the panel. So, you know, when we go to the process of what members get assigned to what committees, the group leaders would have to, that's the only way of kind of mandating it, so the group leaders take a proactive approach in saying to their councillors, to their members, if you want to sit on this committee, you must complete this as part of our group rules. Because from a legal standpoint, it's hard to make it compulsory because it's simply not enforceable.
That's absolutely right, Councillor Madrick. My view would be that the leaders go further, that they engage with their membership and set their training requirements within their own group as part of a personal development review, analogous to being an employee. It doesn't have to be terribly complicated. It needs to be do training A, do training B, tick box A, tick box B when you've done it. That's simple, really. At which point you've got governance and you've got clarity and transparency as to who's sitting in the committee. My worry is if you don't do that, the challenges are much more cohate when they come in because you're not a trained member to make a decision. And you might be acting sort of quasi-judicially on the licensing, you might be acting in an administrative function on planning. But sure as eggs is eggs, if the decision maker is not qualified to make the decision, there's your first point of challenge. That's simple. Thank you.
Okay, Kelly. Well, you need to look at. I didn't realise that important people like group leaders were looking into this, but clearly it needs to be sorted.
Yeah, happy to make an amendment to that paragraph, and I think that was a really helpful conversation. It's the purpose of bringing it here as a draft to sort of make sure we get the nuance right. So no, that was really useful, and Peter will work together and correct that paragraph.
I've always been under the impression it's compulsory, so there you are. So it's come as a shock to my little system. Okay,
thank you.
Have a look at that. Page 83, and I keep asking this question, and I didn't get the answer. Posted at the very last sentence, monitoring and evaluating. The Deputy Chief Executive and Directors, have we such a post as Deputy Chief Executive? No. We don't.
We don't officially.
I know directors stand in.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Chair. We don't officially, since Michael was made redundant from that original post. What David does is has a cohort of directors that stand in for him at his request as the head of paid service. So in answer to the question, the role is dealt with, but it doesn't really exist yet, or has been taken off the ledger.
I'm just suggesting it shouldn't be there then. If we don't. Yeah. Okay. Page 109, and it's the fourth bullet point down. And this really, I never noticed this one before. The chair of the Governance and Audit Standards Committee is independent. Absolutely right. But it's the brackets bit. The chair does not sit in any regulatory committee. Well, I sit on licensing. I think what it's supposed to say is the chair doesn't sit on cabinet. We made that decision some years back that no cabinet member should be on this committee. So I think that's what it means. But certainly, never in the past has it stopped anybody sitting in any other regulatory committees. So, Kelly, we can look at that. Well, that's my bits. And again, I've got some little, I'll email you and email members with a little other points that I want to make up. Peter, do you okay?
I'm fine, thank you.
It probably goes to council, doesn't it? Yeah, statement.
I believe it possibly goes as part of the overall statement of accounts. So yeah, it's and it is of course a widely public document.
Okay. So, Councillor Heaney-Graham.
Yeah, it's just an observation really. We were talking about neighbourhood forums, and actually I did have an email exchange with Natasha Edmonds about this, because at some time, this is quite a while ago, I asked a question because the neighbourhood form in my area, where I actually live, not my ward, was becoming redundant. You know, nobody wanted to do anything and nothing was happening. So I asked the question, and she was going to look into it. But I suspect a lot of other things have overtaken that. But so I think that's the person who may be doing it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Graham. I just picked up something yesterday, just in relation to the training bit, and you know, we dealt with modern slavery yesterday, and of course it jumps out at me. So part 10 was training, and 10.3 said training update is monitored by governance and audit, including the number of members who are undertaking the e-learning course. I have never seen that information, so I presume with the training report we get later on in the year, Kelly, do you have any idea? I don't remember saying, you know, we ran this course and 3 people took it.
There is an annual training report, I believe, that comes, although I suggest it probably gets more into the discussion points, probably not dissimilar to the ones we've had, but I can certainly check with colleagues in corporate training to make sure that information is made available.
Well, if I remember when it comes up, I'll bring it up myself. Okay, thank you very much. So members, can we agree the annual governance statement 22-23 and approve the refreshed local code of governance with those amendments that we have? Is that okay? Thank you, members. Thank you. Thank you, Kelly. Kelly, then, item 6, risk and assurance management policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this report comes as an update to the risk policy for the organisation. There aren't a huge number of changes to previously. Really, it brought some titles and designations up to date and sets out the broad structure for which we manage risk. What's also attached to the document this time is a kind of summary of some of those strategic risks that have been identified in the organisation and the ways that they're playing out and some of the activity that's being taken to manage those. And I think the purpose of bringing that is obviously to give assurance to the committee that there is a regular consideration of risk as it affects the organisation and some consideration around how we manage those risks as they occur. What this doesn't do is pick up very specific operational risks, and I think as in the previous report we sort of set out the directorates manage their own operational risks. Those are subject to lots of review and scrutiny either through director and management teams. Colleagues in audit will consider those as putting the programmes together. Individual projects will also have individual project risk registers. What this puts out is those kind of things where there's a particular theme that's playing into all of the activity in the authority, whether that's in terms of operations, delivery of projects, or just the wider operating context that we're in. So it gives really a bit of a flavour to members of some of those issues as they're emerging. So really the policy is presented for approval, but as I say, very similar to the policy that is already in existence, just being brought up to date, and happy to take any questions on some of those contextual issues with the caveat that I may well have to come back to the committee when I've had the opportunity to consult with those who will be experts in the topic. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Kelly. Just my little point that I raised in the last one, on the directors on page 120, it mentions somebody called the Deputy Chief Executive. Okay, but a few typos, but I'll email you on those anyway. Members, I have nothing this. Anything? Any members? Councillor Brown, Stuart.
Thanks, Chair. Kelly, possibly not one you might have information on here today, but how would you assess or categorise the Council's current risk appetite in comparison to other comparable local authorities?
Was that in relation to a particular issue or in more general sense?
Just in a general sense.
Yeah, because I think the conversations that take place are obviously, that appetite can be very different depending on different contexts. So I think, and I'm sure colleagues would reinforce this, we have a very, very low risk appetite when it comes to risk of harm to persons. And you'll see that reinforced through the work we do around safeguarding, through the work we do in terms of upholding our own health and safety things. All of those issues play into that. I think it is right that that is different when it's assessed around potential activities, maybe in our commercialisation arena or in terms of taking business cases forward, where a different lens is applied to those things and takes into account kind of different contextual issues. So I think to say there is an overall appetite, I think is quite difficult. I think the general approach is as set out in the policy that we accept that risk exists. We accept we probably can't completely manage all levels of risk away, but that all projects and issues are assessed and those relevant things taken into account. I think we have robust processes for assessing those, and I think actually the presentation to this committee forms part of that. So yeah, I think it's difficult to say there is an overall appetite. I think there is an overall approach to the assessment of risk and the application of a risk appetite in those cases.
And actually, now that you've said that, I realise that in the back of my brain I was thinking in more financial terms than anything else, because obviously we've seen a lot of other local authorities in the news having multi-million-pound black holes, which thankfully we've avoided here in Portsmouth. Do you think that could be down to our attitude towards financial risk compared to other authorities, that they've gone into largely into the red when we've avoided?
I'm sure there are colleagues that are much better equipped to comment on the details of the financial things, but I would simply say that, again, there are robust processes in place in the organisation that include regular reporting to this committee and council around things like treasury management, for example, and, again, reports that come forward from audit that highlight those issues to you. So I think the existence of this committee, the wider control framework around that, is all part of that robust approach.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Stuart. Okay, members. Can we then approve the attached risk insurance management policy and agree to review the risk management policy in July 2025, including risk current at the time and lessons learned on the previous years? Is that okay? Graham, as long as there are no costs involved in 2025, we're all right. Yeah? Okay, Kelly, thank you very much for that. And we're on to, not the last item, because I hope we heard Lizzie said that there's something she needs to report, but we have to go into an exempt session. Okay, after this, if members could say, I know you've got to go. Thank you very much, Hannah. So item 7, this must come at least twice a year to this committee, depending on changes on the council structure, but consideration of the political balance rules in relation to the constitution of subcommittees, considering complaints against members, and just draw you to 3.3, all the members present need to vote for it.
Correct. This is the standard report I bring to you every time there's a requirement for reconstitution. It's a direct disapplication of the rules of proportionality under the Local Government Act 1989. And the reason for that is to be able to increase the gene pool available to me for members to sit on the filter panel relevant to members' complaints. And I do it, probably as the Chair said, probably twice a year, and I invite you to do it. The interesting thing is that it has to be a unanimous vote of the members present at this committee, and you have a direct delegation to be able to deal with it. I invite you to make that, give that declaration here and now, and I will deal with the necessary figures and amendments as usual. So I'd invite you to do it.
Any points, members? Is it agreed? Normally is, yes.
Thank you, Chair.
George, I didn't see you. It's got to be unanimous. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, members, for this part of the meeting, the public part. And with just one item, we'll go into executive session. Shouldn't take too long. Thanks very much.
You've got to make a resolution to go into exempt session, so you asked...
Oh, right, oh, it's not on the paper, sorry,
yeah.
Right. So is it okay if we go into... I thought it was just an information item, but
well,
do you agree that we go into an exempt... I've already spoken to Lizzie, and it's got to be an exempt... In my mind, it's got to be... It can't be in the public arena at this stage. Is that okay?
Chair, I propose we go into exempt session.
Well, I'll second that then. Thank you.
Well done, thank you.
Thank you. Is that agreed? Thank you.